Okay, so yesterday we started talking about, we talked about randomization. So there's a few other things that are important. Um, Replication. So as you recall, when we did this little exercise of the Red Sox uh, baseball team, whoops-a-daisy, you know how it varied from sample to sample? So sometimes what statisticians do, what they'll do is they'll replicate. You can replicate using a large sample size, or you can use many samples, okay? You could either do a sample size of 1,000, or you could do maybe 5 samples at, I don't know, 200 each, or whatever, however you decide to do it. So statisticians try, right? Sample statistics from a single sample may differ radically from the population. So statisticians try to address this issue by repeated sampling. Okay? Now, very oftentimes there's the issue with extraneous variables. So, if there are extraneous variables, hold it a sec, I'm just going to get some paper. Okay. Do you remember if we do a study such that, I guess the most simplest example would be CO2 levels, maybe, a nice little easy, and cancer rate in a country. You would think maybe as CO2 rises, you might kind of hypothesize that maybe the cancer rate in a country would rise, right? But what are some extraneous variables that could affect cancer? A person getting cancer, is it just CO2 levels, or what else? Huh? Genes? Is that anything else? Anything else? Yeah, diet. Good. Okay, so statistician might then just study, in order to control this variable, statisticians might just study people who do not smoke. You know, somehow they try to control it, okay? They do different things. One of the ways they do it is with a control group. One of the ways they do that is with the control group. Okay. I took my headset off and I forgot to put it on. Okay. So, researchers will often compare the experimental group with a control group. And so what I've done, I'm going to illustrate that with an example on the next page. And I'm going to illustrate all of this with an example. Extraneous variables are variables that affect either the dependent or independent variable. Here, extraneous means external. Rather, they are very relevant. They're important to your study. You have to take them into consideration. You have to think about what you're doing. All right, when we talk about reliability and validity of data, right? We have to look at appropriateness of survey questions, potential sources of bias, and sample size. Validity refers to does it make sense to you. For example, Does what you're measuring actually measure what you're claiming to measure? So you wouldn't measure happiness with an IQ test. You can't assume the higher the IQ, the happier a person is. Right? If you tried to measure happiness with an IQ test, you would not get a valid measure of happiness. Reliability refers to consistency. For example, well, do you get the same results under the same conditions? For example, in determining the average salary of players on the Boston Red Sox baseball team, the results seem to be consistent and reliable. However, an IQ test would not be reliable if one day a person gets an IQ of 80 and the next day they get an IQ of 130. That's not reliable. You want to get consistent results. You want consistent results. Okay? So, what we're going to need is a few definitions here. So, bear with me. We need definitions. So, starting about here, I'm going to explain what the independent or explanatory variable. It is the variable. It is the variable that affects the value of another variable. Of another variable. So the independent or explanatory variable is the variable that affects the value of another variable. If I look at these two variables here, which one do you think is the explanatory or independent variable? Right, this is explanatory variable. Right in here, we're going to squish in the definition of the dependent or response variable. Sorry. Dependent. I realize this is tight. Can I read it again? Or it is the variable that affects the value of another variable. The dependent or response variable is a variable whose value is determined by another variable. Is the variable whose value is determined by another variable. So we would think in this example, cancer depends on CO2 levels, you would think. So this is the response variable. This is the explanatory variable. We're hoping CO2 will explain increasing cancer rates. Dependent or response variable is a variable whose value is determined by another variable. I'm actually going to need space here, so I'm going to white this out. We have a few definitions here. Next thing I want to describe to you is what is a control group. Group for which the independent variable remains constant in an experiment or statistical study. That's the control group. Group for which the independent variable remains constant in an experiment or a statistical study. Should I slow down? No. Experimental group. Group for which, oh, spelling error. Group for which the independent variable is changed in an experiment. Or statistical study. Okay. So let's look how these, let's do this example of using a control group. Everybody good with the, can I explain anything better? Man alive. Okay. All right. A medical researcher wants to test a new drug believed to help smokers overcome the addictive effects of nicotine. All right. You know, I used to smoke 50 cigarettes a day. I did. 2 large packs. I did. But I quit. All right. Yeah, 2 large packs. 50 people who want to quit smoking volunteer for the study. The researcher carefully divides the volunteers into 2 groups, each with an equal number of moderate and heavy smokers. So just to get, we have 2 groups, 25 each. They tried to make them identical. They have equal number, so it looks like they have equal number of moderate smokers, equal number of heavy. So they tried to make the 2 groups consistent, right? One group is given nicotine patches with the new drug, nicotine with new drug. Second group uses ordinary nicotine. Ugh, patches. You know, sometimes I draw pictures just to help me see the situation better. Which one do you think is the experimental group? This one or this one? Nicotine with the nicotine patches with new drug, or nicotine patches without the drug, the ordinary nicotine. Which one do you think is the experimental group? Yeah. I'm going to write it up here. Experimental group is the group given nicotine patches with the new drug. With the new drug. Now the control group is this one. They didn't get the new drug. They just got the ordinary nicotine patches. Group given ordinary nicotine patches. Without the new drug. So, the independent variable, that's the control group, that's the experimental group. The independent variable, what do you think that is? Right. So we're really talking about presence of new drug. The dependent variable will be, they're looking at the number of people who quit. Okay, so we answered all four parts of part A. The experimental group, the control group, the independent variable, the dependent. Is there something that's hard to read? Okay. Can the researcher conclude the new drug is effective? So what had happened here? One group okay. 14 people in the first group quit. So 14 quit. That means 11 didn't. 9 people quit on this group. That means 16 didn't. Can the researcher conclude that is the new drug effective? You think so? Well, 5 more people quit. Is that effective? Based on this information, would you start mass production? Is it enough information to change your assembly lines and start up a mass production? Probably not. I'll give you the textbook answer, okay? The results are encouraging, but however, the researcher has not proven the new drug is effective. There are extraneous variables. What do you think? What are some things we can do? What further studies should the researcher do? What could he do to check out his findings? Yep. So repeat with the larger sample size. What else could he do? Yep. Maybe it has try again with different doses of medication. Maybe he needs just a few more grams in there or something. Who knows? What else could he do? The other thing he could do is try to control extraneous variables. What kind of extraneous variables are there? Such as what extraneous variables could be affecting his study? Yep. Age. What else? Yep. Number of attempts at quitting. Maybe this time he'll make it. Any other extraneous variables? Yep. Sorry? Yeah. Well, maybe if he's a jogger, he might want to be more motivated to quit. Length, severity of the addiction, and so on and so forth. That's true, they did. Yeah. Okay. So do you agree if we put severity of the addiction if they look into that? Okay, you get the idea. There's always these extraneous variables that we're worried about. What extraneous variable is the researcher trying to control with the use of a control group? Do you guys need that? Sorry? Yeah, is the control group trying to control that though? Because when he did his study, he's kind of comparing two similar groups or trying to. Uh, yeah, I think everything's identical. Yeah. Yep. Ha- Let me ask you something. When you're driving on the street and you see a policeman, what do you do? If you're goofing off in the hallway and you see the principal walking down the hallway, what do you do? Yeah. You stop goofing off, right? So sometimes what they're trying to see is sometimes people change their behavior just because they know they're getting a patch. It kind of, yeah. Or they just because they're being observed, actually. Yeah. And they're trying to kind of isolate that. Yeah. People change their behavior when they know they are being observed. Did they quit because of the new drug? Or did they quit because they think they got the new drug, even though they didn't? It's tricky. You have to be really careful when you design an experiment. Can I, yep. They're just trying to, what they're doing is they're comparing. So what they're trying to get an idea what is really affecting the fact that these people are quitting. Is it that 14 people quit, or is because of the drug, or did they quit because they think they got the new drug? Like, is the difference 14 minus 9 equal to 5? Is that the true effect of people quitting? 5 people quit? Do you know what I mean? They're just trying to compare. It would be different if this was 0 or 1 or 2. But you see, the difference isn't really that large. You'd have to look into it more. These people might be quitting just because they think they got the drug. Yep. Can you just wait till I'm finished teaching and then you can go, okay? Let's do a little bit more. Let's do this, and then Monday we'll start sampling techniques. We'll do some examples there. And then we'll do bias in statistical studies. And then we'll start the number crunching on Wednesday. Population versus sample. We've talked a little bit about this. Notice that the term population does not necessarily refer to people only. It could be the subject you are studying, whether it's iPods produced by Apple, eggs sold by Metro, cats sold in PetSmart, or students attending York Mills. Why is sampling required? Population is so large it's difficult or impossible to collect data on every member. It's hard to survey everybody in Canada. It is less expensive to collect data from a sample, In experiments to determine expected lifetimes, you don't want to experiment with all your product or you are going to deplete your supply. A good example, characteristics of a good example represents the population. Sample must be random. Sample must be large enough so that the data is close to that of the population. So remember, it needs to represent the sample. It must be random. It must be big enough. Identify the population for each of the following questions. Who do you plan to vote for in the next election? Who would be the population? Sorry? Okay. All people who are eligible to vote in the next Ontario election. What is your favorite type of baseball glove? Who would be the population? How would you describe it? Yeah? Perfect. Do women prefer to wear ordinary glasses or contact lenses? Yeah? All right. Okay. Along the same lines, I have here all women who wear corrective lenses. If you need to take any pictures of my notes, you're welcome to them.